Jag undrar vad det är för fel på henne egentligen. Elisabeth Fågel. Elisabeth.
Persona is a 1966 Swedish avant-garde psychological drama written and directed by Ingmar Bergman. The film follows two women, Alma, a nurse played by Bibi Andersson, and Elisabeth Vogler, a renowned theater actress played by Liv Ullmann. The story begins when Elisabeth suffers a sudden and inexplicable mental breakdown during one of her stage performances. As a result, she becomes mute and is admitted to a hospital where Alma is assigned as her caregiver. Elisabeth's doctor recommends that she spend some time away in a cottage by the sea. The doctor asks Alma to go with Elisabeth and watch after her. While living on the island, Alma finds herself compelled by a growing desire to confide in her patient and begins to share explicit details of her own life. As time passes and their relationship deepens, the boundaries between the two women become blurred, and Alma soon begins having trouble distinguishing herself from her patient. Ingmar Bergman was a Swedish auteur, filmmaker, and theater director who through his work confronted his own existential and spiritual questions about the world. With a career spanning over half a century, Bergman directed over 60 films and wrote most of his own screenplays. Deftly exploring mortality, loneliness, religious faith, sexuality, and desire, he has earned a reputation as one of the most influential filmmakers of all time. Collaborating closely with cinematographer Sven Nykvist, Bergman crafted a signature cinematic style marked by haunting close-ups, stark lighting, and symbolic imagery. His films comprise a cohesive body of work by a filmmaker who stared into the existential abyss, holding a mirror up to the human soul in its anguished complexity. Here is the difference between me and Bergman. For me, God is not a mute. When Bergman speaks of God, he does it in the context of God who is silent, who is not with us.
I think it was in 1964, I visited Bibi in Sweden, and there on the street came Ingmar Bergman and stopped, of course, because of Bibi, and he looked at me and he said, "I know who you are." Oh, and he said, "Would you like to be in a movie with me? Just like in a fairy tale book." And I said, "Oh, yes."
The film that she discusses here was a film called The Cannibals, which he ended up never making. It was a large project that he had written the summer before, and the film was set to star both Liv and Bibi. But Ingmar got sick with pneumonia and canceled the film entirely.
Jag är ju den praktiska omöjligheten av att göra den här filmen. Jag tyckte det var förskräckligt tråkigt. Och en av de saker som jag tyckte var allra tråkigast och som jag verkligen sörjde över, det var att jag inte skulle få samarbeta med. När jag sedan började tänka på den här filmen så var det alldeles från första början en sorts lust hos mig att samarbeta med Bibi och Liv. Och jag tänkte att här ska jag liksom nu börja helt från början. Jag ska liksom lämna allt det jag tidigare har gjort. Glömma bort alla tidigare filmer jag har gjort. Alla handgrepp, allt det som har liksom gått lite rutin.
After this revelation and newly acquired creative inspiration from Liv and Bibi, he wrote the entirety of the script for Persona over the short span of 14 days, all while still hospitalized. As he talks about in the previous quote, he also freed himself from the restraints of his regular, rigorous, and authoritarian writing and directing practices by allowing the script to develop as the film was being shot. Before creating Persona, Bergman had been battling with the idea of quitting filmmaking and his artistic endeavors permanently, all because of what he called the crisis of truth.
Jag har gjort 26 eller 27 filmer eller vad det är för någonting och satt upp en förskräcklig massa teaterpjäser och hållit på praktiskt taget professionellt i 25 år. Och jag kan nog säga det att Persona springer ju fram ur en personlig upplevelse, en sorts sanningskris. Att jag plötsligt kände att jag måste ta ställning och vad är det som är sant och när talar man sanning och det där blev till slut så svårt att jag tänkte att den enda formen av sanningen det är alltså tigandet. Och till slut när man tog steget vidare så upptäckte man att det är också en sorts roll. Det är också en sorts mask. Det gäller att hitta ett steg ytterligare. Och det var väl det som kom filmen, alltså själva motivationen till filmen.
Och du har inte på allvar funderat på att sluta?
Jodå. Men det gör man lite då och då. Före varje premiär så tänker man ju, men det kanske av andra sker. Före Persona och i samband med Dramatenchefskap och sådär överhuvudtaget mer än någonsin varit inne på den tanken att lägga av helt och hållet med det konstnärliga arbetet.
Personal accounts from people involved with the film, as well as Bergman himself, say that the filming and creation of Persona in some way saved him. In this video essay, we explored the sudden shift in Bergman and how he used Alma and Elisabeth and the dance of their fractured identities to embody two vital fragments of his own persona, director and character. Dolls that he then used to dissect and discuss his inner battle with the crisis of truth, carried like the weight of the cross, a test of his identity as both artist and human. Before speaking about my interpretation of the film, I want to acknowledge that this is a deeply personal analysis based on my own experience with the film, and also coupled with what we know about Bergman's state of mind during the film's creation. This is not an attempt at an objective analysis, but rather an exploration of how Persona has resonated with me on an emotional and thoughtful level. Part of what makes this such a long-lasting film is that it seems to shapeshift and yield new insights with each viewing. Like a reflection in a hall of mirrors, its meaning morphs depending on where the viewer stands at a point in their life. The film is its own persona, fluid and ever-changing.
Var och en människa ska uppleva detta så som den känner det. Och där är det en väldigt viktig sak för mig. Och det är det där att man kan aldrig förstå en film. En sån här film. Det är inte frågan ens om att förstå. Utan det är alltid frågan om att ha en känsloupplevelse i första hand. Jag vet, och det är likadant med musik. Jag vet, Stravinsky sa en gång, som jag tycker är så underbart, att jag har aldrig förstått ett enda musikstycke i mitt liv. Jag har bara upplevt det.
From the opening frame, Bergman lowers us into a labyrinth, a reflexive world of thought within thought, submerging us into the interior of the film, not merely as passive spectators, but as pulsating, living celluloid. We are assaulted with a barrage of cinematic fragments, each one aimed at our psyche, causing laughter, dread, discomfort, or profound disquiet. After the bombardment, we enter a space that seems to be a morgue, where bodies covered with sheets lay on elevated tables. As the film comes to life, so do the corpses. The figure that we focus on is that of a young boy. It's the same actor, the same character, even engrossed in the same book and framed in the same tableau. Instantly recognizable as the boy from Bergman's preceding film, The Silence. The boy appears as a spectral echo, reenacting gestures and poses from his previous cinematic existence, as if caught in a recursive loop of his own filmed past. We will revisit this idea later when the idea is touched upon again at the end of the film. For now, the boy turns to face us directly, reaching out to caress the screen that separates and joins us, upon which the faces of Alma and Elisabeth flicker and merge. In this moment, we find the truth. When the boy reaches for us, he is reaching for the film itself. There is no distinction, no veil between viewer and viewed. We are one. From the very first encounter between the two women, Bergman makes it clear that Alma is meant to embody the archetype of the character, with her very essence serving as a conduit for a meta-story. In the world of a screenplay, when a character first steps onto the stage, or in this case, the screen, the screenwriter introduces them with a name, an age, and a brief description, as if breathing life into a creation, exactly what Alma does in this scene. She walks into the room and Elisabeth watches her silently from the hospital bed. Alma, in a moment of openness, shares her name, age, and personal details, an act that defies professional boundaries and social norms, as if driven by an invisible script to reveal her innermost thoughts. After Alma has introduced herself, Elisabeth, instead of responding, turns away and stares directly into the camera, melting the illusion of the fictional world. She holds this intense gaze long after Alma has left, a haunting presence that lingers in the frame. Her awareness of the viewer, coupled with the earlier moments of Elisabeth freezing on stage, are the first suggestions that Elisabeth encounters who Alma represents not a character, but the director, Bergman himself.
But my luck at that time was I didn't understand the movie, but I got it in here that I was Ingmar. So I watched him and I used what I experienced because I know I was Ingmar.
When Alma tries to comfort Elisabeth by turning on the radio to listen to a play, Elisabeth bursts into laughter, much like she said she wanted to during her performance of Elektra. In both situations, Bergman/Elisabeth recognizes the deceit and dishonesty in this kind of melodramatic performance. They view it as a lie and want to distance themselves from this kind of deceit. Alma, in her role as the character, comforts the director, saying,
Jag har en kolossal beundran för konstnärer. Jag tror att konsten har en kolossal betydelse i livet. Särskilt för människor som har det svårt på det ena eller det andra sättet.
A line said to himself, Bergman still holds a glimmer of love and hope for his crafts. He is trying to convince himself of the significance and value of creating art. Alma's role as the character is linked to the director's own artistic soul. Without the director's story, she herself would cease to exist. She is pleading for her survival, even if unaware. As Alma lies in bed rubbing lotion onto her face, she speaks to an unseen listener, be it the audience or Elisabeth, despite Elisabeth currently awake in a different room, as we see in the next scene, saying that while they have the freedom to shape their own lives, she is confined to a predetermined path. She will marry and have children because it's all decided. As a character bound to Bergman, she is compelled to live a life she does not choose for herself. In the next scene, we watch as Elisabeth, who again is acting as the embodiment of Bergman, has a meltdown when viewing footage from the Vietnam War. Bergman and Elisabeth are thinking, this is what is real. This is what is honest. This is real pain and real tragedy. He must ask himself, is everything that I'm creating on stage and in film a falsehood? Should I continue to be silent? As a counterpoint to this meditation, we are offered a scene with Elisabeth and her psychiatrist that serves as the film's central thesis. In this scene, the doctor probes the motivations behind Elisabeth's self-imposed absence of speech, seeking to unravel her retreat from the world.
Den hopplösa drömmen om att vara. Varje tonfall en lögn, varje gest en förfalskning, varje leende en grimas. Man kan bli tyst. Då ljuger man åtminstone inte. Men så är verkligheten jävlas. Överallt sipprar det in livsyttringar. Du tvingas att reagera. Jag tycker du ska hålla på med den här rollen tills den är färdigspelad. Kan du ju lämna den? Precis som du undan för undan lämnar alla dina andra roller.
Alma offers a few moments of hope for Bergman before descending, merging, then clashing with his other half. She speaks of the hospital where she took her nursing exam and a residence for elderly nurses who have lived entirely for their work. She says,
Tro på någonting så starkt att man ägnar hela sitt liv åt det. Men tro på någonting. Uträtta någonting. Tycka att ens liv har någon mening. Tycker jag man ska. Betyda någonting för andra människor. Tycker inte du det också?
a piece of Bergman pleads with himself to continue with his work, imploring him to find faith and meaning in it. But when Elisabeth is asked if she agrees, she remains silent. Around a third of the way through the film, the director, embodied through Elisabeth, begins to alter the narrative, and Alma's psyche starts to splinter.
På något underligt sätt så var det aldrig riktigt verkligt. Jag vet inte hur jag ska säga. Mina plågor var nog verkliga, det var de.
In this moment, Elisabeth's face is obscured, their identities merge. Alma, in some small way, begins to realize that her life is not her own, but a mirror of Bergman's personal experiences. In a sense, it is a dialogue between character and creator. Alma acknowledges, at least subconsciously, that her existence was never quite real. but the emotions she experienced were. She accepts this as an inherent aspect of her role as the character. She feels what she is directed to feel, acts as she is instructed to act, as if that's how it was supposed to be. For Bergman, this should be reassuring. There is sincerity in the world he has created, a reality that resonates for the characters who inhabit it. In the pivotal scene where Alma confesses her affair to Elisabeth, the embodiment of the character begins to crumble, and the pessimistic part of Bergman comes to the forefront. Alma as the character stands exposed before the director and audience, recounting in vivid detail one of her most profound deceptions, her darkest lies. And we begin to understand that for Bergman, the character is his personal vehicle for dishonesty and miscommunication within his films. Their actions and words are often misinterpreted, leaving him far from the truth and unable to genuinely connect with others.
Det är väl det att jag så extremt upplever numera att jag gör mina produkter i första hand för min egen skull. Det är ett kommunikationsbehov. Jag har ett behov av att uttrycka mig, meddela mig. Det är alltså det primära behovet.
So far throughout the film, Alma has talked of her idyllic marriage, her loyalty, and now drunkenly confesses it has all been a facade, a carefully crafted illusion, and nothing but deceit. This scene provides further evidence that Elisabeth is in full control of what is happening within the world of the film, like a god or a puppet master. She whispers instructions to Alma, who then absorbs them and repeats them nearly verbatim, as if they were her own thoughts.
Nej, nu måste jag gå och lägga mig. Annars somnar jag vid bordet.
Alma goes to bed and is woken up by a ghost-like apparition floating from a room into another, and then finally ending up standing over her bed. Blaring horns sound out like warnings to one of the girls, or both, or neither, or maybe to us. The women gaze towards an unseen mirror, perhaps the camera lens itself, and merge into the image of one woman. Elisabeth, and by extension Bergman, wants to demonstrate their oneness, but to what end? Does she yearn to be as hopeful as the character in Alma? Does she wish for Alma to share in her own frustration and torment? Could it be that she just wants it all to end? Evidence that the veil between them has lifted emerges the following day when Alma inquires if Elisabeth spoke to her in the night. Elisabeth shakes her head in denial, in turn lying, the very act of deception she and Bergman so despise. Alma persists, questioning whether Elisabeth visited her room the previous evening. Once more, Elisabeth responds with dishonesty by shaking her head. Her eyes betray a sadness born of her own falsehoods, yet also give a glint of astonishment at Alma's growing awareness into the nature of their own staged existence.
På tal om förräderibrevet så anser du uppenbart att det är ett förräderi som begås. Ett förräderi man begår när man studerar.
Jag måste korrigera mig där. Alma upplever det som ett förräderi.
Ja.
Jag upplever det inte så. Jag kan uppleva det svåra när man är i detta yrke. Att man hela tiden, och det gör väl ni som skådespelare också. Intressant med mig också. Ja. Att man gång på gång studerar människor. Det där kan man verkligen diskutera länge. Men att varje konstnär som sysslar i de här olika medierna hela tiden registrerar, noterar, iakttar, suger i sig, käkar på omvärlden. Den saken är ju alldeles klar. Och jag måste säga det att ibland kan detta alltså iakttagande, ätande, hur legitimt den är, kännas ruskigt. Man upplever det understundom som någonting moraliskt mindervärdigt.
Even in this interview clip, Bergman is at war with the different sides of himself. On one hand, he claims that observing others is not a betrayal, but an essential part of the filmmaking process. But in the same breath, he states that no matter how legitimate the observation, there is a disturbing sense of moral transgression. He feels guilt over what he must consume from others' lives to include in his films, but it is also essential in his quest for honesty within his art. The betrayal letter is crucial to the film. It confirms Alma's position as the character who is being studied and observed by someone who she thought she was looking after. She feels used and angry as one naturally would, to have her darkest secrets written down by Elisabeth to be used for a role, exposing her true lived experience for the sake of art. She finally sees the deception and cruelty in Elisabeth. Her trust evaporates, replaced by the urge to hurt and fight back. The two sides are now divided and in conflict with one another. In retaliation, the character lashes out at the director, placing a shard of glass on the ground for Elisabeth to step on. When Elisabeth realizes the glass was placed there deliberately, she looks directly at Alma and shatters the film into pieces, much like the glass, and then proceeds to burn a hole through Alma's face. Who would possess the power to break the film when in pain? The director, essentially declaring, "If you wound me, I will destroy you. I have the authority to end all of this." The sound runs backwards in clips from other films, cut in chaotically, a callback to the film's introduction, before we are back again within the film persona, meaning that the director has found a reason to not abandon the film entirely. Upon re-entering the film, Elisabeth wears an outfit resembling Bergman. She no longer conceals her identity. It is unclear whether time has passed, rewound, or fast-forwarded. We are lost, and so is Alma, who seems to have retained some autonomy, as the director seems to have no idea where to find her. Betrayal resurfaces in this scene as Alma begs Elisabeth to simply speak to her, to say anything. In this context, a director speaking equates to making films, and without a director creating a character cannot exist. So she pleads.
Konstnärer upplevde andra människor med en stor medkänsla. Du har använt mig. Till vad vet jag inte, men nu behöver du mig inte längre så kastar du bort mig.
After a fight between the two, they reconcile. Alma asks,
Måste det vara så här? Är det verkligen viktigt att man inte ljuger? Att man talar sanning och att man har äkta tonfall? Är det inte bättre att man ger sig själv lov att vara slö och slapp, lögnaktig?
By this point in the film, Bergman approaches a resolution to his crisis of truth. A person might be at their best by just speaking simply, even if it is sloppy and dishonest. Then, during a sudden moment of clarity, Alma's words slice through the illusion of reconciliation, exposing the uncompromising divide between them. She says, "No, you don't understand. There's no reaching someone like you. I know how rotten you are." Bergman exists within himself and therefore knows himself truly. His inner thoughts, desires, conflicts, and believes himself to be at his core truly rotten. After that line, Elisabeth, as Bergman, flees, escaping from the film, his characters, and himself. Elisabeth returns to the house, in limbo, trapped between abandoning the film and persisting with it. She retreats to her room where she experiences another breakdown when she finds a photograph of a young Holocaust victim. Her reaction echoes her response to the Vietnam War: shock, horror. At this point, Bergman has forsaken all, abandoned his characters, abandoned himself, and departed the film entirely, leaving it to exist as a godless world. The screen fades to black and we are left alone. The film comes back to life and we are with Alma as she struggles to get out of her bed. She panics, partially paralyzed, then flails her body and stares straight at us, in a shot that directly calls back to the morgue in the beginning of the film, with identical framing and blocking. This moment is fleeting and easily overlooked, but the precise replication of the earlier frame makes me believe that it must hold meaning. If we interpret the previous scenes fade to black as Elisabeth and Bergman abandoning the film, then the characters, including Alma, will consequently cease to exist. From this, I believe that the morgue at the beginning of the film is a place that holds the corpses of all of the characters from Bergman's films, and that Alma was temporarily there before being awoken again by Elisabeth changing her mind about abandoning the film. Curiously, the credits omit the actors portraying the two older characters in the opening morgue scene. I suspect that they may be characters and actors from Bergman's earlier films. The resurrection of these characters at Persona's beginning points to a unified cinematic universe, where characters spring to life with each new film, forever bound to the director's creations. This connection exacts a toll on Bergman's psyche as he grapples with the weight of their imagined existence. He is haunted by the possibility of abandoning them, consumed by obligation, and compelled to sustain their lives through new films. Waking up from the morgue space, Alma reaches for the radio, which crackles and spits out a few phrases. We don't speak, don't listen, can't understand, as the man's voice simultaneously calls out, Elisabeth. She rises from her bed and enters Elisabeth's bedroom, laying her head close to Elisabeth's sleeping head, caressing her face with deceptive tenderness. The man still calls for her, so she goes to find out what he wants from them. Alma walks by the thinly veiled curtains of the house. A single step propels her into an unfamiliar exterior, mirroring an actress crossing the threshold from stage wings to stage, entering her play. She is approached by a man who we soon find out to be Elisabeth's husband. He reaches for Alma and repeatedly refers to her as Elisabeth. Only when Elisabeth herself appears, physically manipulating Alma's limbs like a puppeteer, does Alma fully submit to her identity as Elisabeth.
Jag älskar dig. Lika mycket som förr.
The two have now fully committed to their roles of the character and the director. Elisabeth, as Bergman, watches somberly from behind, as he is having his actors reenact his own life, turning his own torment into a story that he has to bear witness to again and again and again. In the next scene, Alma, as the character, begins to recount some of the horrific details of Elisabeth's life and her darkest thoughts.
Men hela tiden spelar du rollen. Rollen av en lycklig, ung, väntande mor. Under tiden försökte du flera gånger ta bort fostret.
The character now also holds power in their dynamic, and this power is in knowledge. And so the director must suffer from hearing their own exposed truth. As Alma is recounting the horrific thoughts and acts of Elisabeth, finally feeling that she is getting her revenge from the earlier betrayal, she is shocked when their faces for a second become one, and she too has the realization that they are two parts of the same persona. The horrors she ascribed to Elisabeth are equally her own. She immediately desperately rejects this, crying out,
Jag är inte Elisabeth Fågler. Du är Elisabeth Fågler. Jag vill gärna ha... Jag älskar...
She is physically unable to continue her words. She doesn't love. On her own, devoid of desire or affection, she is only a character. So she does as she is scripted. The rest is blank.
Jag har inte...
In a final confrontation between the two women, Alma says,
Jag blir aldrig som du, aldrig. Jag ändras hela tiden. Du kan göra med mig vad du vill, du når mig ändå inte.
This statement is true, but she cannot persist as a character without a director. A part of her grasps this. She furiously smashes her arms against the table, unable to form a sentence, an erratic attempt at free will. But even this is soon exposed to be controlled by the director, who mouths through her every word of gibberish that escapes Alma's lips, exactly like the whispered stage directions from earlier in the film. Confronted with her utter lack of autonomy, Alma slashes her wrists with her own nails. Elisabeth quickly licks up the blood to keep her from dying. Then Alma grabs her hair, shoving Elisabeth's face into her wound as if to say, "Consume my pain if you want to experience it so badly. Drink from my wound if you want to make art from it." In the end, only Alma exists, since characters are the only ones to exist in a film. Bergman has decided against silence. He will continue to make films, which is shown through Elisabeth's return to a movie set. Her choice in the narrative to reject muteness mirrors Bergman's own life.
Near the completion of Persona, Bergman celebrated the occasion by gathering everyone at the camera track that was used to shoot the big hullabaloo. The ceremony is very much directed by Bergman and recorded by members of his crew and by Bibi Andersson. Here on the shooting of Persona, I have had the best part of my life.
Persona ends in a way that mirrors the beginning. We have been in the world of the film all along, and the film simply runs out. We are left in darkness.